Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. And today, we're taking a look at Exodus chapter 4.
Okay.
It's a big one.
Yeah.
And we are looking specifically at the return of Moses to Egypt.
Right.
So much going on in this chapter.
It is.
You've got these encounters with God. You've got this reluctance to lead.
Yeah.
And even kind of a mysterious and potentially dangerous incident.
That's right.
So much to cover. I mean, where do we even begin?
Well, one of the things that always strikes me about this chapter is how human Moses comes across. We tend to think of Moses as this, bold, courageous, confident leader.
Larger than life.
Absolutely. But here we see him really grappling with this incredible calling.
Yeah.
He's hesitant. He's full of doubt.
Right.
And I think that makes him incredibly relatable, even thousands of years later.
Well, let's talk about that hesitation, because Exodus lays out Moses' second round of objections to God's instructions.
Right.
He says things like, they're not going to believe me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm slow of speech and slow of tongue.
Yeah.
So essentially he's saying, I'm not a great public speaker.
That's right.
Now, is this a lack of faith or just an honest assessment
That is a great question.
of how hard this is going to be?
I think it's open to interpretation. On the one hand, it could be seen as a moment of doubt, a crisis of faith.
Yeah.
But it could also be understood as Moses simply trying to process the sheer enormity of what God is asking of him.
Right, because he's going up against Pharaoh.
Exactly.
The most powerful person in the world.
The most powerful person in the world at that time.
I mean, you can't really fault him for having a few reservations.
Totally. But God being God has ways to address these objections.
Right.
And he gives Moses some signs, some proof.
He does, and they're pretty dramatic.
Yeah.
We have the staff transforming into a snake.
Right.
Moses' hand becoming afflicted with this condition called Zarath, often translated as leprosy.
But it's not quite the same as how we understand leprosy today.
It's not a modern medical diagnosis.
Exactly. And then his hand is healed.
Yeah.
And finally the Nile water turning into blood.
Yeah, so, I mean, those are
some visuals.
big visuals.
Absolutely.
And those aren't just there for show.
No.
Right. I mean, these are meant to prove God's power.
To prove God's power to Moses, but also to the Israelites who have been enslaved for generations.
Yeah.
Imagine witnessing those events. I mean,
You'd have to believe.
It's a reminder that God often works through the tangible, the visible.
It's not all abstract and ethereal.
No, it's right there in front of you.
Yeah, but it's also interesting to me that even with these signs, God doesn't force Moses' hand.
Right.
He gives him a choice.
That's a crucial point.
Yeah, so there's this recognition of free will.
Exactly. Even when God has chosen you for a specific purpose.
Yeah.
And this leads us to the introduction of Aaron, Moses' brother. God basically appoints Aaron as Moses' spokesperson.
It's like a divine workaround.
Right. Directly addressing the whole slow of speech concern.
Yeah, and they form this unique leadership team.
They do.
Where Moses receives these messages from God, and then Aaron delivers them to the people.
It makes you think about the different ways leadership can manifest.
It does.
You have the more introspective, perhaps even hesitant leader in Moses, paired with this more eloquent communicator in Aaron.
What do you think the text is trying to tell us through this leadership?
That's a fascinating question.
Yeah.
I think it highlights that effective leadership doesn't always mean having all the answers or possessing all the skills yourself.
Right.
It often involves recognizing your own strengths and weaknesses.
Knowing what you're good at, knowing what you're not so good at.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And being willing to seek support and empower others to utilize their gifts.
Right. So with Aaron in the picture, Moses is ready.
Seems like.
He returns to Egypt.
Yeah.
God even reassures him that those who wanted to kill him are now dead.
Right.
Okay. So you'd think everything would go smoothly from here.
You would think so, wouldn't you?
But of course, that's not how it plays out.
Not exactly.
Oh.
The tension actually ramps up right away.
Okay.
Because God instructs Moses to confront Pharaoh and warns him that God will harden Pharaoh's heart.
Wow. And God even foreshadows.
He does.
A very serious consequence.
A devastating consequence.
Which is the death of the firstborn sons of Egypt.
Yeah, so right from the start.
Heavy stuff.
It is. We see this power struggle brewing between God and Pharaoh.
Setting the stage.
Setting the stage for everything that's to come.
Yeah, and it's interesting how the narrative mirrors the psychological and political tensions at play.
Absolutely.
we have Moses wrestling with this internal conflict. And at the same time, he's entering into this huge confrontation.
It creates this incredible sense of anticipation and suspense.
It does. And right before that confrontation with Pharaoh, there's this really weird incident with Moses and his wife Zipporah and their son.
This is one of the most puzzling passages in the entire book.
It is. We're told that God suddenly tries to kill Moses.
Out of the blue.
It's so jarring, especially after everything Moses has already been through.
Right. It's like, where did this come from?
It leaves you reeling.
And then just as suddenly, Zipporah, Moses' wife, she performs a circumcision on their son.
Okay.
And this seems to appease God.
So we're left with some big questions here.
We are.
Why did God try to kill Moses?
Yeah.
And what's the significance of the circumcision in saving him?
What is going on in this passage?
That the text doesn't give us any straightforward answers.
No, it's very cryptic.
So what are your thoughts?
Well, this is a passage that's generated a lot of debate and discussion among scholars.
Right.
Because it's so brief.
Yeah.
And it lacks so much detail. It's really open to a wide range of interpretations.
Which is both exciting and frustrating at the same time.
It is, but what's fascinating is that each interpretation often reveals different ways of understanding God, covenant, and even the role of ritual.
So it's a real head-scratcher.
It is.
And it challenges us to think deeply about this text.
Absolutely.
And it happens right before Moses and Aaron finally make it to Egypt.
That's right.
And they meet with the Israelite elders.
And despite this near-death experience, they deliver God's message and perform those incredible signs.
Yeah.
And the impact is clear. The Israelites, seeing these signs and hearing the message, they believe.
Wow.
And they worship.
It's a moment of unity.
A powerful moment of unity.
Yeah.
And a testament to the power of faith.
In the face of incredible hardship.
Exactly.
Yeah, they've hit a turning point.
Right.
For generations they've been living in slavery.
Under this oppressive system.
And now all of a sudden there's this glimmer of hope.
That maybe change is possible.
That God is with them.
It's a powerful moment.
It is. But, we were talking about that incident with Zipporah and her son.
Yes.
And all those different interpretations.
Right.
Can you unpack some of those views for us?
Sure. One interpretation focuses on the importance of circumcision as the sign of the covenant between God and Abraham. Proponents of this view argue that God was angry with Moses for not circumcising his son.
So they see it as a violation of that covenant.
Right, essentially. So in this view, when Zipporah performs the circumcision, it restores Moses to a state of ritual purity.
It's like hitting the reset button.
In a way, yeah.
Yeah, and averting God's wrath.
Exactly.
Wow, that's really interesting how a single act can carry so much weight.
It speaks to the power of ritual.
It does. And then there's that other interpretation that suggests maybe this incident reflects some kind of clash.
Like clash of cultures.
Yeah, between Yahweh, the God of Israel,
and the Midianite deities
associated with Zipporah's family.
It's an interesting possibility.
Yeah, because, you have to think about the historical context.
Right.
The Bible was written
in a world
where different cultures and religion
were constantly bumping up against each other.
They were all mixed together.
Exactly. So this passage could be hinting at some of those complexities.
It's monotheism.
Emerging in a world that was still very much polytheistic.
Right. So it's like a snapshot of that cultural and religious change.
That's a great way to put it.
And then there's that third interpretation.
Yeah.
The symbolic one.
Where the incident isn't necessarily meant to be taken literally.
More like a metaphor.
Right, for the dangers and sacrifices
that are part of Moses' calling.
Precisely. So the near-death experience
could symbolize all those threats he's going to face.
As he leads the Israelites out of Egypt.
And then Zipporah stepping in.
Could represent the sacrifices his family is making.
Right, to support him on this mission.
It's a beautiful image.
It is. It really shows how these ancient texts can have
layers of meaning.
Yeah, like you have the literal events, but then underneath that, you have all these deeper symbolic meanings
that invite us to think more deeply
about those big themes.
Exactly. It's a reminder that engaging with these texts often requires us to go beyond just the surface level.
To really dig in.
And explore those layers of meaning.
So, thinking about this chapter, with all its complexity.
It is a complex chapter.
What are some of the key takeaways?
About Moses as a leader.
Well, even though he was hesitant at first.
Full of doubt.
You can see how he's growing.
Right.
He's not afraid to talk to God.
Even when he disagrees?
Yeah. And even questions God's commands.
He's pushing back.
Voicing his concerns.
That's a dialogue.
And then eventually he steps into that calling.
He rises to the occasion.
I love how the text shows that vulnerability.
Yeah.
He's not perfect. He has doubts.
He makes mistakes.
And that makes him more human.
And more relatable.
Yeah. And he also trusts Aaron.
Right.
He knows he's not a great public speaker.
He acknowledges his limitations.
And he lets Aaron take the lead on that.
It shows real maturity.
And self-awareness.
You don't always see that in leaders.
Even today.
It's true.
It's not about doing everything yourself.
It's about building a team.
Yeah. And knowing everyone's strengths.
And working together.
Towards a common goal.
Exactly.
I think that's one of the big lessons here.
About leadership.
Yeah. That it requires humility.
Self-awareness.
And empowering others.
That's a powerful message.
So the Israelites, they're on the edge of freedom.
Right.
Their faith has been renewed.
They have a leader.
But their journey is far from over.
It's just beginning.
Pharaoh's not going to let them go easily.
Oh, no.
That whole incident with the hardening of his heart really sets the stage for what's coming.
It does. That conflict between God and Pharaoh, it's just getting started.
And the stakes are really high.
The death of the firstborn, the plagues.
The Red Sea.
It's all coming.
It's not just about physical freedom.
No.
It's about this spiritual journey.
It's about faith being tested.
And God's power being revealed.
On a grand scale.
Makes you think about, like what are the limits of what people can handle?
Yeah.
How does faith help us when things are bad?
Mm-hmm.
And what does it really mean to be free?
Right.
These are all questions.
That we're still grappling with.
Thousands of years later.
Absolutely. And that's what makes the Exodus story so powerful.
Yeah.
It speaks to these universal experiences. Oppression, liberation.
That longing for freedom.
The search for meaning and purpose.
Yeah, and I think we can all relate to that feeling of being stuck, of facing obstacles that seem impossible,
right?
Of wanting something better.
Yearning for something more.
And the Exodus story
reminds us that
even when things seem impossible, even when we feel powerless,
there's still reason to hope.
Yeah, to keep believing.
And to keep fighting for a better future.
And what I love is that the Israelites, they aren't just passive. They choose to believe in Moses. They follow him into the unknown.
Even though it's risky?
Even when it means risking everything.
Their faith becomes a force for change.
It's a reminder that we're stronger together than we are alone.
Collective action.
Yeah, shared purpose.
That's how real change happens.
So, thinking about the lasting impact of this story, why do you think it still speaks to people today?
Well, I think partly it's because of those universal themes we were talking about, but it's also the human element of the story. Moses isn't this perfect hero.
Right. He struggles. He has doubts.
He makes mistakes.
But he steps up.
He answers the call.
That's what makes him so relatable.
Yeah, he's not this distant mythical figure.
He feels real.
He's a human being dealing with incredible circumstances.
And we can see ourselves in his journey.
In his weaknesses and in his strengths.
Even the way he questions God.
Right.
Expresses his fear.
It makes him more accessible.
It does. It reminds us that faith isn't about blind obedience.
It's about that dialogue.
Yeah, wrestling with those big questions.
And ultimately choosing to trust.
In something bigger than ourselves.
Beautifully said.
So, we've covered so much in this deep dive.
We have.
We talk about Moses' hesitation.
The sign.
The importance of Aaron.
That mysterious incident with Zipporah.
Yeah, Pharaoh's hardened heart.
And the Israelites' faith.
What's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from all this?
I think the most important takeaway is that even when we're facing huge challenges, even when we feel afraid,
we have the power to choose faith over fear.
Hope over despair.
The Exodus story shows
it's possible.
It shows that resilience,
courage,
and that power of transformation.
Yeah.
So well said. As we all go on our own journeys, let's remember the lessons of the Exodus.
To believe in freedom.
To stand up for what's right.
Even when it's hard.
And to trust that working together can bring change.
And maybe, like Moses, we might even find ourselves in conversation with the divine.
Questioning, seeking, and finding the strength to answer our own callings.
What a beautiful thought.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Exodus chapter 4.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time.
Keep exploring.
Keep questioning.
And keep believing.